taken September 1943, and it's the wedding of my Aunt Margaret, known in the family as Maggie, Aunt Maggie. And I'm just going to talk about two people in it. One is the bride, Maggie. The other is my grandfather, who's the man standing at the back who has this wooden image over his shoulder in his daughter's wedding photograph. My grandmother is not in the photograph because she was very much opposed to the wedding. The reason she was opposed to it was that Maggie, and I'll use the family name, Maggie had only been going with her boyfriend for about 6 months. My grandmother said, if you get married after only 6 months, people are going to say you're pregnant. No, she was not pregnant, right? Her answer was that I am not going to fall into the situation of Mary. Mary is the bridesmaid, my mother. And my mother's situation was that my father had been missing in England for 2 years during the war, no message, no nothing. And she said, my fellow, he's going to England to work, and I'm going to go with him as his wife so that I will know what's going on, as such. And my grandmother's response was, well, if you get married quickly and you then emigrate, people are definitely going to say that you're pregnant, that you have to get married. And it was a very bad taste. The marriage did take place. They went to London. And on the morning of the 6th of June 1944, which was D-Day, Maggie had a medical appointment with a doctor who told her, confirmed what she already knew, that she was 3 months pregnant. And happy and on her way home, Maggie stepped out in front of a bus and was killed instantly. Now this was wartime, no fast response, no fast messages, and it was quite a while before family found out that Maggie was dead. And by then, she had been buried. Her husband was traumatized, so much so that he didn't know where she was buried. All he remembered was that she was buried in a churchyard with a ruined church that had been bombed, which in London during World War II, plenty school. My grandmother was traumatized by it, so much so that she moved the family to London and spent the rest of her life searching for where Maggie was buried, never finding it. My grandfather had no say in the decision because my grandmother ran the family, not because it was a matriarchal society, but simply because he was a deep-sea sailor. He would be home for 6 weeks and away for 3 months and home for 6 weeks, and in the meantime so she made the decisions. That was my grandfather. The reason my grandfather was home and available to attend his daughter's wedding was because he was on what was called torpedo leave. If your ship was torpedoed, you were given leave. He was a merchant seaman. And his ship had been torpedoed between Scotland and Denmark on its way to Iceland to take part in the convoy that was going to Russia. The ship was sunk. He was in the water. The instructions to the ship's captains was they were not to stop to pick up survivors. But the actual captain behind, what he did was he slowed down and he threw some nets over the side. And my grandfather said that he was pulled up into the ship like a fish in a net, but he was pulled up as such. And he refused to go down into the engine room to warm up because he said those in the engine room in my ship didn't get out. That ship was torpedoed. And in the middle of the confusion, my grandfather took an axe that was behind the wheelhouse, chopped off the door, and using the door, managed to stay out of the water long enough to be picked up by a Swedish fishing trawler. And because he had Irish papers and we were neutral, and Sweden was a neutral country, they basically said to him, Grant, there you are, find your own way home. And in wartime, he worked his way home. He never spoke about it until one night when he was leaving Waterford, when he finally was retiring, he was leaving Waterford, and he spent all night talking to my mother. And my mother asked him, she said, how could you have to know in the middle of this thing to actually be able to act? And his answer was, I had all the fear frightened out of me in the trenches. I learned how to act when I was terrified. He had been in July 1916 at the Somme and survived. He was shot in the shoulder in the Third Battle of Ypres, that's called Passchendaele, two of the bloodiest battles, where between the two of them over 500,000 were killed. And he never ever spoke about it. But when he came home, my mother said he had lost his nerve. He believed that this wooden figurine, this wooden god, was a South American god, was protecting him. My mother pointed out that he hadn't had this wooden god when he was in the trenches. He hadn't had this wooden god when he was in the ships that were being torpedoed. That was just no. She said he was absolutely convinced as such. Now, he did go back to sea. But any time he was at home, he never went to bed unless he was absolutely, totally drunk. And when challenged on it, he said, "I am afraid of my dreams. I am afraid that my dreams will drive me mad." Now, when he went to London, he got a job in a factory. And he got a job working the night shift. And my mother says that's what saved him, because he worked during the night, and then during the day it was disrupted sleep and he didn't have to dream. And so, this is just one story of my family, but there are lots of ways that stress and things can affect you, that can psychologically damage you. My grandmother was damaged. My grandfather was damaged. So I'm going to stop.